Hello, and welcome to this, our 95th live stream, Egyptian myths interacting with this live stream. Of course, we are the channel, Ancient Egypt and the Bible. I mean, what else would we be interacting with other than Egyptian stuff and the Bible? So, it stands to reason that we'd be interacting with this. So anyway, we want to welcome you to tonight's live stream. Again, we're going to do what we always do every Friday night, which is take your questions on Ancient Egypt and the Bible. And the rules are the same as always. So, super chats have priority. This is totally standard on YouTube. So, that's just the way it goes. But we also take non-super chats. And we'll take some at the beginning, and then at the end of the live stream, we take usually a couple as well. So the way the non-super chats work are, if you want to direct a question to me, you need to preface the question with a Q and a colon. We ask that you only ask the question once, because I scan through the live chat to look for questions. So if you do it more than once, I get easily confused. We also ask that if you're asking about a verse in the Bible or a word in an ancient language, we ask that you preface that verse by including where you got it from, the book, chapter, and verse number. That really helps. Also, if it's about an ancient language, we also ask that you put in what language it's from and what you think the word means, just to give us a little bit of context here. So anyway, that covers all the preliminaries very, very quickly. So let's get into the questions, because we have got a fair number of non-super chats tonight, but not so much super chats, so it might be a short night. Who knows? I might get to bed early. You know, things happen. Miracles happen sometimes. Who knows? So anyway, we're going to start with some non-super chats. Our first non-super chat here is from Bonbon. And he asks, did charismatic preacher types regarding temple priests exist in ancient Egypt? And if so, how were they viewed by lay Egyptians and the Egyptian elites? Okay. Well, unfortunately, as much as it'd be interesting for charismatic preacher types to have been around in ancient Egypt, there was generally not charismatic preacher types. Okay. The reason why was because Egypt was a highly stratified society. You tend to get charismatic preacher types in non-stratified societies. So when there's basically a social pecking order, people tend to stay in their roles. So priests tend to stay in their priestly role. Farmers tend to stay as farmers. Slaves tend to stay as slaves. So in a stratified society, you don't get people sort of transcending it. It happened, but it was rare. And they almost never disrupted the social order because they're trying to climb the ladder, not sort of break the ladder. So we don't actually find a lot of charismatic preacher types or even rogue prophets. There may be one rogue prophet that we can name in ancient Egypt, but it's really the exception, not the rule. Also, every town had its own, say, temple or chapel. Then you had temples that were basically administrative centers. And then you had other temples that were, say, for more formal cults. So religion in ancient Egypt was highly structured. Because it was highly structured, you didn't get a lot of priests going outside of the structure. So that's sort of it in a nutshell here, that charismatic preacher types didn't exist in ancient Egypt. That's more of a modern phenomena. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. You asked a lot of great questions tonight, and this was the first one we selected. Okay. The second question here is from Bonbon again. There was a trend towards personal piety during the transition to the New Kingdom, but apparently Akhenaten reversed this. What were the reasons for it in the first place, and was the reversal permanent? It's a great question. The fact is, personal piety in ancient Egypt sort of rose and fell with the various political changes at the time. We actually see the first personal piety movement happen during the first intermediate period during Egypt's civil war. The evidence for this is we find that personal and private tombs start increasing in religious motifs, in the amount of decoration they used, how much focus they started placing upon individual cults. And we see that upswing in personal piety as I said, in the first intermediate period. And that's the period between the Old Kingdom, that's the Pyramid Age, and the Middle Kingdom. We don't see another sort of upswing in personal piety until Dynasty 12 during, say, the Middle Kingdom, the later Middle Kingdom, particularly towards the cult of Osiris. The kings of Egypt were very, very devout and even almost evangelical towards the Osiris cult. And they were the ones that were primarily responsible for the Osiris cult's spread across Egypt. Before Dynasty 12, the Osiris cult was really very localized into the Abydos area. But it was the Middle Kingdom kings that really sort of took the Osiris cult, made it their royal cult, and then spread it everywhere. So at that point, you see a big upswing in personal piety. Then you do get a little bit of this at the beginning of the New Kingdom following the fall of the Hyksos, but it's not as dramatic. I think that's a little overstated that it was that there was a big swing in piety at the beginning of the New Kingdom. At the beginning of the New Kingdom, you see more tombs having, say, nature motifs, scenes of life, slices of life kind of motifs, that sort of thing. It's really not until after the fall or after the decline and abandonment of Amarna, that's basically after the Amarna period, that's the period of King Akhenaten, that you start seeing personal piety swing up again. You see a marked transition in tombs from slice of life scenes to religious motifs. So at that point, they're doing focusing on personal piety, but it's once again towards the polytheistic system of ancient Egypt. So we really have to keep in account here that the circumstances, the political circumstances, and the religious circumstances are going to really affect the ups and downs of personal piety in ancient Egypt. And it's just not one period, it's several periods. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the regular non-super chat question, and it's a great question. Our third question from Bonbon, because he asked like 20 great questions tonight, and we had a hard time choosing them, is: can you elaborate on the relationship between Thutmose III and courtiers and other elites? Did he ever execute any of the courtiers and or intellectuals who were still loyal to Hatshepsut? All right, I'll answer there's two questions there. I'll answer the last one first. No, he did not execute any, because he'd have a revolt on his hands. We have to understand that those elites and courtiers put Hatshepsut into power, and more importantly, they kept her in power. So they had a lot of power even when Thutmose III assumed the throne. And Thutmose III wasn't an idiot. He knew the political score. Now, his relationship with those courtiers were, he hated their guts. He absolutely hated those courtiers. He hated the vagaries of court life. Now, we have to understand that when Hatshepsut came to the throne and Thutmose III hit 9, 10 years old, she shipped him off to the army. And if he had a happy accident while on military campaign, all the better. What she didn't realize is that he would totally thrive in military life. He had no role, almost no role in court life until the end of Hatshepsut's life. So, even though he was by right king, he was in no way king. Not until Hatshepsut herself died. So, when he finally came back and got the throne, secured the throne, he was not a happy camper. He was not happy with those courtiers, and they had to sort of grovel. But he despised them. And he took every opportunity to leave the court to do other things, most often going on campaign. This is one of the reasons why Thutmose III went on campaign so often, is because he hated the courtiers, he hated court life, he couldn't stand them. So, it's really not until his late in his reign where has basically cleaned house. All the old courtiers are dead. He's replaced them with his own men. That he's finally comfortable being at Thebes, where the seat of his power was. So anyway, thank you for that question. It's a fascinating question. So anyway, that's 3 questions. I hope that pleases you. So anyway, we're off to a couple other super chats here. Our next super chat here is from, non-superchat, is from Chow Yi. And he asks, is there any evidence that the design of the pyramids was based upon sacred geometry? No. That's the short answer, is it was not based upon sacred geometry. It was based upon trial and error. A lot of people want to think that the pyramids were, because they seem to be very, very ideal to mathematics, that they were designed that way. It's actually quite the opposite. They tried all sorts of different configurations of pyramids, and they were complete bombs. So it was more that they stumbled onto the perfect geometry for a pyramid and then sort of stuck with it. Now, with that said, every pyramid is slightly different in its dimensions and its orientation. So even though they sort of stumbled onto that formula of the perfect incline for a pyramid, there's variance, usually of 1 or 2 degrees. And that doesn't seem to have largely affected the stability of a pyramid all that much. So it was more trial and error than it was based upon a mathematics. So anyway, I hope that answered the question. Thank you very much for the question. It's a great question. And our final non-super chat for now is, we'll see. We got 501 Mobius here. And he asks, how can Kadesh be both in the desert of Paran, Numbers 13:26, and the desert of Zin, Numbers 27:14? Okay. Now, it will help our audience to kind of understand where these deserts are. The desert of Paran is in the northeast Sinai. As you kind of go from Sinai into, say, Canaan. The desert of Zin is southish of the Dead Sea, north of Ezion Geber, and it's on the border of Edom. Okay, and they are 2 separate deserts. They've been recognized in history as separate deserts. There's nothing controversial about that. The controversy comes from Kadesh. Okay, and we'll reference your 2 verses here. So we'll take the first one here. And there's a lot more to this than just these 2 verses, but we'll just use these verses as reference here. So the first one is in Numbers 13:26, which says, they proceeded to come to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the sons of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. And they brought back word to them, to all the congregation, and showed them the fruit of the land. And then, of course, we have Numbers 27:14. For the wilderness of Zin, during the strife of the congregation, you rebelled against my command to treat me as holy before their eyes at the waters. These are the waters of Meribah of Kadesh in the wilderness of Zin. All right, so that's the two biblical passages you cited. There's more passages that could be cited here, but this is a very old problem. This has been a problem that's been recognized at least since the Second Temple period. And it's been commented on by Ramban, Rashi, and Ibn Ezra. But it's also been tackled by text critical scholars who believe that these are two separate redactors that are trying to redact a text to something that can be reconciled. Okay? Now, I'm going to take the view of the rabbinical sages, and more recently by David Ben-Gad HaKohen, who wrote recently on this. And what he claims is what we're dealing with here is two Kadeshes. Now, if you do a course on the geography of the Holy Land or of the Mediterranean in general, one of the things you discover is you can encounter multiple places with the same name, essentially. There are 21 places named Antioch in the Mediterranean world. 21. When I did my thesis, my master's thesis on early Gnosticism and its relationship to the cult of Thoth, I discovered that in Egypt alone, there were 3 cult centers by the name of Hermopolis. You do get multiple places with the same name. So, what are we dealing with here as far as this particular passage? You are dealing with one Kadesh, which is also known as Kadesh Barnea, and that is in the wilderness of Paran. Basically, it's the site of Ain el Kuderet. You also have a second Kadesh that's on the border of Edom in the wilderness of Zin, also known as the waters of Meribah. So what you have here is 2 separate Kadeshes, and they're identified by their respective wilderness. And this is the solution that was proposed by the rabbinical sages. It's the one that's proposed by HaKohen, and that's the one that I think makes the most sense. Because really, the multiple redactor solution here does not make a lot of sense. So anyway, that's how I would answer this question. Thank you very much for the question. It's an interesting question. Okay, we'll take actually one more non-super chat here before we get into the super chats, which is from Dafa Rafiali, and he asks, do you think the Septuagint is God-breathed, or only the original Hebrew? What errors does the Septuagint have? Are there any changed poor translations? Is translation and paraphrase God-breathed? Okay. It's a great question. But in some respects, it sort of misses the point of God-breathed, which is, what is the effect of the message? That's what's God-breathed. God-breathed is the message, not the translation. This is a huge mistake that, say, the King James only people make. They want to basically say that the words of the King James Version are the inspired version of the Bible. Well, no translation it's a translation of the original. Its words are not inspired. But the message is still God-breathed. So what you're going at here, how you have to engage this problem, is to understand that that it's God's intent and the effects of his message that are God-breathed, not the actual words themselves. So, any translation that say, waters down the message is going to be less God-breathed. So, say a very idiomatic paraphrase, or a paraphrase that completely changes the message, is not going to be God-breathed because it's not going to be communicating the message. So, with that said, that's the answer to your last question. Rolling back, what errors does the Septuagint have? Well, it has several, but I'm not going to get into that here. That's sort of beyond the scope of what I can get into in a 3-minute super chat. However, it does have errors. All manuscripts have errors. But that's because the manuscripts are being passed by human copying. Human copying introduces textual errors. But it's the message, not the copy, that's inspired. So that answers that question. Is only the original Hebrew inspired? God-breathed? Well, no. But at the same time, too, the original Hebrew is going to get you to the closest to that original message. Because it's not a translation, there's less opportunity for error. There's still going to be some transcriptional errors in there, copyist errors, but the message is still in there. So the Hebrew is going to preserve it better. We're talking here about the preservation of the message, not the text being, the words being inspired themselves. So finally, getting back to the very first question in that question string, do you think the Septuagint is God-breathed? Its message is God-breathed. But again, we're going to have to take every text and compare it to see if we got the message right. So if the message in the Septuagint is consistent with what we find in the Hebrew texts, then I have no problem saying that that particular message is God-breathed. So anyway, thank you for the non-super chat. I hope that sort of clarifies this issue, or at least gives you something to think about. Okay, we're on to super chats. That was a very, very interesting set of non-super chat questions. Okay, our first non-super chat here is from Addison Weir for $1.99. Thank you very much for that super chat. Rest in peace, Michael Heiser. You will surely be missed. Yes, he will surely be missed. I happen to very much like Michael Heiser's teaching. I thought it was very profound. I also had a lot of agreement with him too. I ask everyone to pray for the Heiser family at this point. We ask that you keep them in your prayers as they go through this time of grieving. He left us way too soon. He left us way too soon. I think there's a lot of things that we can say about the man. He was an excellent teacher. He was an excellent writer. And he basically pointed out many things in Scripture that people have been missing. And I think that alone is a laudable thing. So again, pray for his family. He was a great blessing to the community of Christ. And he's gone on to be rewarded by his master. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Our next super chat here is from Joseph Green for $20, who has a very, very long question. It's actually a couple questions, but we will try to take these piece by piece because it spans across five chats. So we'll read it and we will try to make the best of this. Okay. First one, part 1. I have seen a lot of Dan McClellan on TikTok in my feed randomly. Oh, I'm sorry. It appears to me like he and many others, like Dr. Stavrokopoulou, seem to use a lot of things the Bible says happens as proof that somehow the Bible is wrong. For example, ancient Israel and Judah worshipping other gods and doing pagan practices means that Yahweh wasn't worshipped the way we know today until after the Babylonian exile. So why does this seem to be such a popular view amongst archaeologists / historians? I don't know. We'll pause there for a moment. Because what we are dealing with here is Sunday school exegesis. Okay? Sunday school exegesis. Once a lot of these historians, especially the ones that deconvert, reach their professional maturity, they tend to stop reading the Bible. They either think they know it or they disdain it. So you stop reading something for, say, devotional purposes or to really sort of grasp the meaning, because the Bible for them is taking on a new role. It's taking on a new role. It's something you criticize, not something you try to understand. This leads a lot of people to rely on the understanding of the Bible that they learned as children. And often that understanding is incomplete, or it sort of caricaturizes what the Bible is saying. Like, for example, the whole idea that the Israelites practiced idolatry, therefore, there wasn't any Yahweh worship or anything like that. The way we know it today it's in a respect, it's a caricature. It's a caricature. It's a caricature of what the Bible actually says. Because if you read the Bible, it's always railing against the Israelites for being worthless idolaters. Nowhere in the Bible does it talk about Israel being faithful to Yahweh. It's crazy. It's absolutely bizarre. Because you can read all through the Bible and they're just going on like, hey, you're worshiping idols. Even after the Babylonian period, hey, you guys are bringing spotted lamb for sacrifices. You're not giving your tithe. You're ignoring the ritual feasts. It's just like nowhere in the Bible is Israel ever accused of being faithful to Yahweh. It's crazy. So, I heard this conference paper once, given about the speaker, a young guy gets up. This is at an SBL conference, and he starts talking about Yahweh and Asherah. He gets down off the podium and he goes, says to one of the, say, more conservative Bible scholars, see, the Israelites weren't monotheistic Yahweh worshippers. And the conservative scholar just says, well, duh. Haven't you read the text? But it's this caricature. It's a caricature of what the Bible says, not what the Bible actually says. This is, as I say, this is my greatest frustration of dealing with, say, even other Bible scholars, is they've either haven't read the text or they forgot what the text said, giving them the benefit of the doubt that they once knew. It's a constant struggle to get even them back into the text so you can properly engage the argument. Like I heard say Maggie Bryson said, well, you'll find no evidence of the Israelites worshiping Yahweh in Egypt. Of course you won't. They were worshiping other gods in Egypt, according to the book of Joshua. It's just, they're not reading the text, or they're not remembering the text. So this is why I say it's Sunday school exegesis. It's Sunday school exegesis. It's what they learned in Sunday school, and they haven't progressed beyond that because they stopped reading the text. All right, so let's continue with your question here. They seem to lack a lot of evidence for their jump to a conclusion that the Bible was changed after the exile, and there seems to be a lack of awareness that the things they claim ancient Israel and Judah did are already stated within the text. The Bible said it happened. Somehow finding proof of ancients worshiping other gods means that it all changed later. I'm honestly confused by their logic. I hope this makes sense. Sorry for being long-winded. Well, thank you very much for the question, even though it was 5 parts long. I usually like questions a little shorter than that. But I think you get the idea of what's happened here, which is that they have a bias that is a caricature, and they're finding evidence to strike down the bias, strike down the caricature. It's ultimately kind of a straw man, because they're not actually engaging the Bible on the Bible's terms. They're gauging it on the terms of a caricature. So, again, it's hard to fight this because those sort of ideas are very strong. The stuff we learn when we're kids really, really resonates with us when we're adults. It's almost inescapable. It's almost inescapable. So, when you've got, and this is one of the reasons why I'm so against teaching caricatures to children. I still hate, whenever I walk into a Sunday school classroom and I see a little tiny Noah's Ark with the heads of giant animals sticking out of it. I mean, kids are going to remember that image. They are going to remember that image. And they're going to carry that image into the biology class. And it doesn't take much to knock that down. So this is why I'm sort of, in many respects, against sort of that Sunday school artwork. Because artwork contains a message. It does for adults. If it didn't, advertising wouldn't work. And it does for children. So I think this is a problem that in many ways is systemic and caused by how we teach in the church. We're not teaching children in a serious way. And because we're not teaching the message to children in a serious way, they are taking with them a caricature that they are going to bring into adult life. And that's going to result in deconversion. That's going to result in basically these people becoming enemies of the Bible. Because what they've been taught is so easy to blow down, you could do it with the wisp of a feather. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. All right, our next super chat here is from Megajam for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. And here she asks, is it true that the word Gentile in the Bible could have referred to an Israelite from the northern kingdom after the split? Okay, now, the word for Gentile in Hebrew is goyim. It just means nations. Now, typically, Israelites, even northern kingdom Israelites, were not typically called goy or goyim. Okay, those were seen as the other nations. So it's not typical for it to be used in this respect, and I don't know of any instances where it is, but I also could be wrong. It is possible that, from the perspective of the kingdom of Judah, they might have been referred to this. I'd have to really look back in the text to see how it's used, how the word goyim was used, and see if it is used in that way. I just don't know off the top of my head if it was. If it is, you'd probably find it in the books of Kings or Chronicles. But off the top of my head, I'm not sure if it's ever used that way. It probably could be in sort of an extended meaning kind of way, especially as the Northern Kingdom becomes more and more tied to Assyria. So it's possible, but I'm not sure. I don't know for certain. But I wouldn't rule it out either. But as I said, typically, goyim's used of Gentile nations. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. And I'm going to have to say a qualified I don't know here. The next super chat is also from Mega Jam for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. If you are familiar with Assassin's Creed series of games, small, sort of, how faithful to ancient Egypt is the Assassin's Creed Origins video game? I get this question a lot, which means I have to play more Assassin's Creed Origins. Now, I only got as far in Assassin's Creed Origins up to, say, the archery contest. So I didn't get that far into the game. The reason why I didn't get that far in the game is it started to look like work. The Camel Leopard says Dr. Falk Gaming Channel. Well, I don't know about that. But suffice it to say, though, that I thought my original impressions of the game was that it was, I mean, the video effects are stunning. I really, really enjoyed the video effects. I think it is the closest video game to ancient Egypt that I've ever seen. Okay? It's the closest by far. The clothing is generally correct. The artifacts are generally correct. The village layouts are generally correct. The scenery you'd find in, say, ancient Egypt is generally correct. There are some things, however, that are not correct. That first, a temple that you go in the introductory round, there was no temple in ancient Egypt that was that huge. That thing was massive. The largest temple complex in ancient Egypt is Karnak Temple, and it's about 100 acres. Okay? But it's 100 acres of temples spread out. There was not one temple there. There was many temples, and they were separated by much distance. Okay? There was no single temple that was that size in ancient Egypt. Not even close. Even the largest temple in Egypt, you could walk from one end to the other in about 5 minutes. It's really short. It's really short. So, and that's probably the stretch of Karnak Temple from, say, the pier, the first pylon, right to, say, the altar at the back. Okay, on the east-west axis. So, with that said, there's, and even that, it's mostly open courts. So there was no closed court temple that went that far back, that huge. And there are colossi in that video game that were larger than even the largest colossi in Egypt. So they scaled everything up for that teaching level. So, as I said, scale is often off the charts on Assassin's Creed Origins. But it does give you the feel of ancient Egypt. It does give you that feel. And they did try to use some hieroglyphic texts as they did the motifs. Like, for example, I read the cartouche of Ramses III there. So it was in one of the scenes. So I know it's there. So, anyway, if you want to do it, I mean, you could actually learn a fair bit about ancient Egyptian culture through the game. And I know that there are people who are using the game as a method to teach ancient Egypt. So there is enough that's good in it that I think if you want to sort of have an appreciation of ancient Egypt, it's a good start. Just understand that some things are going to be inflated. Things are not going to be exactly the same. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it, and I hope that helped. Okay. Okay, and our next super chat here is from AB for a very, very generous $49.99. Thank you so much for that very, very generous super chat. Very much appreciate that. Could you explain more why you think Jonah was dead when it says he prayed in the belly? Thanks. Okay. For this, we need to go to the book of Jonah. So pull up our Bible again. Okay. We're going to go to Jonah. All right. And the end here. We'll start at verse 15 of chapter 1. So they picked up Jonah, threw him into the sea, and the sea stopped its raging. Then the men feared the Lord greatly, and they offered sacrifice to the Lord and made vows. And the Lord appointed a great fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the stomach for 3 days and 3 nights. Okay? So that's the setting. So, chapter 2, verse 1. Then Jonah prayed to the Lord his God, from the stomach of the fish. And he said, so he's dying at this point. I called out of my distress to the Lord, and he answered me. I cried for help from the depth of Sheol. That's the grave. Okay, that's the abode of the dead. Thou didst hear my voice. So, physically he's praying from it, but he's made that transition. So the prayer begins as he's dying and ends in the afterlife. Okay. Verse 3. For thou didst cast me into the deep, into the heart of the seas, and the current engulfed me. Thy breakers and billows passed over me. So I said, I have been expelled from thy sight. Never I will look again toward the thy holy temple. Water encompassed me to the point of death. Okay. Now, I'm going to take a quick look at just the Hebrew there, because I think there is something a little extra we need to put in there. Oh, where is it? Okay. So I'm just doing a quick check here. The waters encompassed me. Okay. While his soul in the deep, rounded. Something right here. Okay, it's probably just a. It's verse 5, not 6. Oh, I'm missing it here. There's something else going on here. I'm just gonna have to move on here because I'm just not finding it. I'm getting too distracted by the Hebrew here. Okay. Okay, so water comes me to the point of death. Now that point is not, as I recall correctly, it's while dying. Okay, the great deep, that was it. Okay, that was what it was. The water encompassed me while dying, or while being dead. The great deep engulfed me. The reeds were wrapped around my head. Verse 6, really important to this passage. I descended to the roots of the mountains. Now, you have to keep in mind here what's being meant here. The earth with its bars here is actually pillars, was around me forever. What he's describing here is sacred cosmology. Sheol is under the earth, under the waters. Okay? So he's dead. He's passing down the underworld. Okay? He's passing down the underworld. He's descended below. He's not in the fish anymore. He's not in the fish anymore. His soul has descended below the roots of the mountains. And the bars of the earth were around him forever. Continues, thou hast brought up my life from the pit. Okay. Now, this is looking forward to from the pit here, but again, this is the effect here. And while I was fainting away, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer came to thee in thy holy temple. Okay? So, this is what's going on in the passage. He's been swallowed by the fish. He descends to Sheol, under the roots of the mountain, into under the bars, the pillars of the earth, and that's where the abode of the dead is. So, he is dead as a door knocker. Okay? The fact is, he would never have survived the belly of a fish anyway because of asphyxiation. But this just sort of amplifies, in very poetic terms, and this is poetry, that he was dead. And then, of course, in verse 10, the Lord spits him up, and Jonah, and he's alive. We're not told how that happens. We're just told that it happens. So, that's the gist of what's happening in Jonah chapter 2. As he enters in the fish alive, he prays, he dies. Then the Lord brings him up out of the pit and spits him up on the dry land. So that's the sequence of events that's happening in Jonah chapter 2. So anyway, I hope that explains it. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. It is an excellent question. Most people do think that that this is referring to Jonah just sort of hanging around in the belly of the fish, all alive. No, he is totally dead. 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 Osiris kind of dead. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. And thank you very much for the support of this channel. We really appreciate it. Okay, I'm going to continue on here. Tui asks a good question, which is, the Hebrew vagueness in translation is ad nefesh, up to the throat, up to the breath. Or does water surround him, choking his life? It doesn't appear to be that the water was choking his life. I don't get that sense. I mean, he's going to have a lung full of water at some point here, because he is definitely in the water. It does seem to be that up until the breath is appropriate here. Again, it's a difficult passage of Hebrew to actually sort of untangle here. It doesn't help that the Hebrew text is not consistent here, passage per passage or verse per verse, with the English either. Yeah, I got the ad nefesh in verse 6 here, and you do see this in another place. And verse 6 says in the Hebrew, the waters encompassed him encompassed me. Sorry, the waters encompassed me up to the breath. Okay, and that could be an allusion to drowning. I mean, that definitely could be allusion of drowning. The sea and the abyss, surrounded me. The reeds, bound my head, or something along those lines. But yeah, you do have that in here, so that could be part of this as well. So there's a lot of nuance in this passage. So it's hard to just sort of take this one and just sort of parse it apart, just because there's a lot of little ambiguities and vagaries in this passage. So, but I think the overall message is clear, that he's dead, and that was really the point of the super chat, and I think that's really the point of Jonah 2, is he's dead. Because even though it doesn't matter the means, whether it's drowning or whether it's actually being swallowed, yeah, they're half a dozen, six of the other. But the point is that he didn't make it, essentially. So anyway, I wanted to take that extra additional question from Patui here, because I think it added a little bit of extra detail to the discussion. All right, our next super chat here is from...
See Joanne's?
No.
Jonah had gills. I can't see how he could breathe underwater.
Yeah, it's because he didn't breathe underwater for 3 days. It's a good comment, though.
Read it.
All right, let me find it here. Joanne, unless Jonah had gills, I can't see how he could breathe underwater for 3 days. Yeah, exactly. What? You didn't see the David C. Cook drawing? Where he's got a spacious apartment in the belly of a whale? It's a condo. It had a table and a chair and a little oil lamp. He didn't lie in the belly of the whale. He was seated. He had all the comforts of life in that belly.
Of course, he had to eat fish 3 meals.
What's wrong with eating fish 3 meals a day? I eat fish 3 meals a day. Oh. VeggieTales had a song and dance number. Oh. VeggieTales. You are creating so many atheists. Sorry. This is not good. Not good at all. Okay. Let's see what's next here. Take down the Bible here. Jago Davis for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. He asks, did Osiris concept originally originate in Egypt? Did Osiris concept originate in Egypt, or was it brought into Egypt? From what we can tell, it seems to have originated in Egypt. And it originated in an area called Abydos. Okay, and that's more in Middle Egypt. It was a cult center that went back to pre-dynastic times. So the Osiris cult goes way, way back. It was one of the two, Abydos was one of the two national cemeteries in ancient Egypt. The other one being Saqqara. But at Abydos is where we have the tombs of the earliest kings of Egypt. Going back to the Nagata III Dynasty 0 period. So the Osiris cult is believed to be at least as old as the Nagata III period. So you're talking about 3500 BC at the minimum. Possibly going back as far as 4000 BC. So there is very strong evidence to suggest that the Osiris cult originated in going that far back and from that area of Egypt. Now, the rub here is that the Osiris cult did change over time. It swallowed up other cults. It also swallowed up other religious practices. So the Osiris cult never stayed static. It changed over time. It adapted with its culture. And the Osiris cult of the Nagata III period is very, very different than, say, than the Osiris cult of, say, the Middle Kingdom, the New Kingdom, or even during the Ptolemaic period and Roman times. So the Osiris cult changed dramatically over time. Changed its practices, changed its form, even changed its looks. So that mummified form wasn't always the look of Osiris. So it was a cult of change. Things did not stay the same in the Osiris cult, but its origin does seem to come from the Abydos region of Egypt. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. All right, we have a $5 super chat from Piety Tismatos for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he asks, how compatible was Egyptian writing with other languages? Oh, not compatible at all. We'll get to that. The 2nd BC papyrus, Amherst 63, seemingly an Aramaic psalm, but was written in Demotic script. Okay. Yes, it is. Now, as long as it could copy the phonemes, you could do this. Now, the problem with Demotic script is you do have to, in many ways, translate it. So, while Amherst 63 contains Aramaic portions, it does have to spell it out in Demotic. Now, Demotic is very odd anyway. Demotic is a ligature. It's a ligature script. In order to read Demotic, you have to know what Demotic says. It's kind of a backwards way of reading things, but you're reading it by the pattern of the ligature. So when you do translate something into Demotic, you're really sort of taking it down to its uniliterals and trying to convert it into its essential uniliterals. That's a difficult process. Now, Egyptian scripts and Aramaic do share a lot of the same phonemes. Same phonemes, same sound patterns. But the problem is, while you could do this for one off here and there, like, say, Amherst 63, you can't really do it for, say, large pieces of text. It's very, very difficult to do, which is why we don't find these very often. This is why, for example, when Egypt had to send diplomatic correspondence across the ancient Near East, it always sent it in Akkadian, in cuneiform Akkadian. It just was more practical to translate the Egyptian at home into Akkadian and then send out the Akkadian tablets than to actually send out the Egyptian in hieroglyphic to the ambassador at the other end and have them translated there. A lot of scripts are not fit for purpose for multilingual work. This is not uncommon. Some are better than others, though. Greek, for example, is terrible. Even though Greek does try to do this on several occasions, it does end up butchering a lot of the phonemes. Egyptian and Aramaic are close enough in a lot of phonemes that it could probably pull this off, even though with some difficulties. And there are difficulties in the phonetic transcription of the Aramaic Psalm into Demotic. So it's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. So this is why typically in, say, those Elephantine papyri, you don't normally get those texts being translated into, say, Demotic. It just wasn't typically a practical thing to do. However, there were people within, say, the community at Elephantine that were interested in, say, Yahweh worship, either through marriage or through other associations. And that would allow some motivation, at least make an attempt to transcribe that. So, anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. But overall, Egyptian writing does not work well with other languages, because most Egyptian writing, again, is going to use uniliterals to do most of this stuff, and the Egyptian script is much too big. It's based upon biliterals and triliterals for the most part. Yeah, it has the uniliterals as well, and it uses them, but it usually doesn't use them to spell things out in, say, the same way that you find alphabetic texts. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Our next super chat here is from Angel WVM for $10. Thank you very much for that super chat. Hi, Dr. Folk. Do you know why the king of Hiram was displeased with the cities Solomon gave him in 1 Kings 9, 11, 14, and is the 120 talents significant? Well, let's take a look at that text. All right, 1 Kings. First Kings 9. Okay. The King of Tyre. King of Tyre. Hiram, King of Tyre, had supplied Solomon with cedar and cypress and timber and gold according to all his desire. And King Solomon gave Hiram 20 cities in the land of Galilee. So Hiram came out from Tyre to see the cities that Solomon had given him, and they did not please him. And he said, "What are these cities which you have given me, my brother?" So they call the land Kabul to this day. And Hiram sent to the king 120 talents of gold. Okay. Now, this could just be cultural. Basically, Solomon gives... We have to remember that Israel was not a large nation. Its cities weren't big. They were more like towns. If we're really, really honest about this, the biblical text calls the nation of Israel the smallest of the 8 surrounding nations. So Israel never had a huge population to begin with. But it was also widely distributed. So having its population distributed out, its towns tend to be typically small and usually not all that significant. So Solomon sends a letter to Hiram. He basically says, "Hey, I'm going to give you these cities. Why don't you come out?" And Hiram goes, "Great, I get, some new cities. 20 new cities. I'm going to go out and have a look, see what these new territories of mine look like." And it gets there, and he's probably expecting. I mean, he comes from Tyre. Tyre's a big city. Is adjacent to holdings. Sidon, big city. He goes up to Galilee. He takes his time to leave Tyre, goes, has a look at Galilee, and finds a handful of cow towns with sheep herders. And Tyre's a big port city. It's a big port city. I mean, it's so big it has to expand. It has an island region. It's got a coastal region. It's big. It's a port city. Lots of traffic and trade coming through it. It's cosmopolitan. Galilee is hardly cosmopolitan. It's goat herder region. Yeah, of course he's not going to be impressed by this. He's got, oh no, now I've got 20 goat villages to look after. Yeah, it's no surprise he wasn't pleased.
BC's comment.
BC's comment. All right, let's go take a look. Hasn't shown up yet on mine, but okay. But yeah, I mean, frankly, this is the effect that this would have had on a cosmopolitan king like Hiram. He was a cosmopolitan king. He was king of a big, important city. Much more important than any other city in the nation of... Yep. Absolutely. Because, that's just the fact of the matter is that it's just... You're really talking about the difference here between, say, again, a king of a cosmopolitan city and a village. Really, a village. I mean, even Jerusalem, sort of the biggest city in Israel, wasn't that big. It really, really wasn't. Solomonic period Jerusalem was probably 10,000 people. It was tiny. Tyre probably had at least 10 times that many people, if not more. So there is a difference here in scale. What made Solomon important was not the number of people. It was the fact that he controlled the trade routes. Solomon's nation was prosperous and wealthy, but it wasn't numerous. So Solomon could put on a show because he had the wealth to put on a show. But he also did not have the people to, say, create, vast cities all across Israel. So Ancient Israel was more of a salted and peppered with various villages, but it did not have mass concentrations of people. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. I don't think the 120 is significant, other than that was more of a that was a gift that Hiram gave Solomon, probably more to secure trade routes, to be honest. So you do see that sometimes where kings will give large amounts to make sure that they have open roads. So that was probably what was happening with that. So while there was sort of the trade for the cedars, that probably was not an equal exchange. So while Hiram gave cedars to Solomon for the building of the temple and provided workers, that probably was not enough to secure the road. So that was probably the additional payment that needed to be made to secure the trade for Tyre down the coast into, say, Egypt. So anyway, I hope that answers the question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. All right, John Bullerman for $10 Canadian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Gnosticism is a perennial problem, but what recent rumblings of it are on your radar? Okay. Probably the most recent rumbling of it. Oh, I should explain. For those who don't know what Gnosticism is, I do have a 3-part series on Gnosticism. Gnosticism, in a nutshell, is the belief that one is saved through secret knowledge. It's not who you know, it's what you know that saves you.
The opposite of Christianity.
Yeah, it's the opposite of Christianity. And it's a religion that sort of derives from a blend of Neoplatonism and Egyptian religion. Really, Egyptian religion that sort of tinkers with Platonism, so that it becomes Neoplatonist-like, but that's quibbling. Nevertheless, it has a way of adapting itself to almost every religion. Because what it does is it takes the sacred texts of any religion and it allegorizes it to give it Gnostic meaning. This is why you find Jewish Gnostic sects, Christian Gnostic sects, Manian Gnostic sects, Islamic Gnostic sects. You find Gnostic sects in Europe, in Asia, in North America. You know, Christian Science is sort of the paradigmatic Gnostic sect of North America. But you also have others as well. Probably the most recent has been, say, Michael Petro's Valley of Healing, which has made some big splashes. But it's clearly a Gnostic sect. And that's probably the one that's been most recent on my radar, and that was like last year. Now, I understand that there's been some issues inside that group, some discontent after some failed prophecies. So that's a situation in change at the moment, in flux. So, but that's the most recent I've heard of anything Gnostic that's come on my radar in, say, the last 12 months. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. The Camilla Part for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Was the mixed multitude of the Exodus meant to parallel the salvation of all people through Messiah? If so, why isn't this highlighted as much? Ooh, interesting. Well, we're getting here into points of Christology, high Christology, typology, prophecy. There is something to this. That one of the things that that Israel was supposed to be was it was supposed to be a kingdom of priests to deliver God's message to the world. So, yes, definitely the mixed multitude was supposed to parallel the salvation of all people through Messiah. But that is a secondary meaning of high Christology. Now, we have to understand what we mean by primary and secondary meanings. The primary meaning is the surface meaning of the text, what it's meant to say to its original context and to its original reader, which is, it does not happen to be first century Christians or basically us today. It was meant to convey that a bunch of other ethnicities traveled with the Israelites out of Egypt. Okay, that's the surface meaning. But looking at it through the lens of high Christology, you can look at that and you can say that this was a parallel to the salvation of all peoples through Messiah. That's definitely true. And that is consistent with New Testament typology. Now, if so, why isn't this highlighted as much? Well, I think there are some scholars that do highlight this. I think the like Beale would definitely say that this is a parallel of high Christology. But then again, too, Beale, G.K. Beale will see high Christology everywhere. For Beale, Christology is the primary reading. Now, here's one of the things I disagree with on Beale. I read his book on the temple. Okay, now being an Old Testament guy, I'm super fascinated with the temple. You know, I want to know about construction. I want to know about layout. I want to know about iconography. I want to know about fabrics and materials and rituals and like the ritual cycle in the temple and how all that's done. Nope. Beale didn't talk about any of that. He talked almost entirely about how the temple is a typology for Jesus Christ. I think you're missing something here, like the original context. Okay. So while I think typology is important, I think it is a valid reading. I think it has to be the secondary reading, not the primary reading. I think this is where I disagree with a lot of New Testament scholars, is because a lot of New Testament scholars are so wrapped up in, say, the New Testament world and the New Testament exegesis and how they did an exegesis in the first century. They do tend to say that they confuse, say, the exegesis of the Second Temple period and first centuries with the exegesis and the proper or the primary context of the ancient documents themselves. Okay? So, this is why I think that while I don't think this is, I think this is highlighted. I think there are New Testament scholars that do this. It's less obvious and less overt than say a lot of the other overt typologies that you do find in the New Testament. So I think those overt typologies do get more attention. But I also think too that it is a valued reading. And I also think it's a valued reading given the history of Israel, that it was supposed to be priests to the world. It was supposed to reach out to the pagan nations. And they failed in that. They closed Yahweh worship off to themselves and did not take the message out there. Unless they wanted to convert them to Jews. But we do see this pattern over and over again in the Old Testament, where occasionally you get a righteous Gentile. You get righteous Gentiles. You know, you get this mixed multitude. You get Uriah the Hittite. You get Jonah having to go and preach to Nineveh, and they repent. You find righteous Gentiles. Rahab the harlot, righteous Gentile. Ruth the Moabite, righteous Gentile. You get righteous Gentiles. And this was meant to be an embarrassment. This was meant to embarrass Israel to reach out to its pagan neighbors, which it never did. So, with that said, I do think it is important to recognize that while this is typology, it's got a pretty good basis for it too. So, it's a balance. It's a balance. You take the primary context, and you take a valid secondary high Christological view, and you've got a wide panoply of meaning here. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it, and I hope that helped. Wow, we're almost at the end of the super chats. This was early. Okay. Travis Garrett for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Leviticus 5, 4-6 would this allow for Jephthah to not burn his daughter? Given that he does in Judges 11, why does he get an honorable mention in Hebrews 11:32? Okay, good question. Let's read the Leviticus first. Leviticus here. Leviticus 5. Four to 6. Or if a person swears thoughtlessly with his lips to do evil or to do good, in whatever manner a man speak thoughtlessly with an oath, and it is hidden from him, and then he comes to know it, he will be guilty of one of these. So it shall be, when he becomes guilty in one of these, that he shall confess that in which he has sinned. He shall also bring his guilt offering to the Lord for his sin which he has committed, a female from the flock, a lamb or goat, as a sin offering. So the priest shall make atonement on his behalf for his sin. Okay? Would this allow Jephthah to not burn his daughter? Yes. Absolutely. This is the escape valve. This is the safe harbor. He can get out of it right here. This is permitted. Okay? Given that he does in Judges 11, why does he get an honorable mention in 11:32? All right. Now, there's a missing piece here. We have to remember that he is located in the hinterland. He's located in the hinterland. He is also the son of a harlot who's driven out of the house very young. He was never raised as a proper Israelite. He doesn't know this text exists. He is more familiar with the pagan practices of his region than he is with the scriptures. In those more outskirt regions, child sacrifice would have been more common. Just like we find in a lot of, say, outskirt religions on the periphery, they tend to more adapt to local practice than they do to, say the liturgical prescripts. This is why, for example, you find some aberrant practices in, say, Roman Catholicism in Mexico than you do in Vatican City. Okay? In Vatican City, you're getting pure liturgical practice. In Mexico, you get some people who are practicing some pretty strange stuff like Santa Muerte. Okay? Saint of the Dead. So you do get some strange stuff on the outskirts of liturgical practice. The same thing's happening in Israel. You're going to get a very, very different liturgical practice out on the Heshbon and the Arnon than you are, say, in Jerusalem or at Hebron, more the centralized cult centers of Yahweh worship. This is just because you got a higher concentration of priests, of reading of the texts, of public displays of religion. Out on the Arnon, at Heshbon, you're not getting any of that. So that's going to be really, really change Jephthah's perception of what's permitted and what isn't. Not knowing about this section of Leviticus, he's going to follow the local practice, which is to commit child sacrifice. Okay? So that's why he carries through with it instead of sort of getting out of it. Is because he's ignorant. And Judges 11 really shows how ignorant he is. He knows practically nothing. He knows practically nothing. So now that raises then the question of why does he get an honorable mention in Hebrews 11? Let's go to Hebrews 11. Now, I don't think I will read the whole passage, but it says, now faith, I will start a little bit at 11 and just drop down. Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. For by it, the men of old gained approval. It's not, one of the things here we have to understand is this gained approval. Not everything was approved. Okay, and that's an important thing to consider here. Okay. By faith we understand that the worlds were prepared by God, so that what is seen was not made out of things which are visible. We'll go start dropping down now. So started verse 8. Continue verse 8. By faith Abraham, when he was called, obeyed, going out of a place where he was to receive for an inheritance, and went out, not knowing where he was going. By faith he lived as an alien in the land of promise, as in foreign land, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, fellow heirs in the same promise. For he was looking for the city with foundations. Okay. Now, one of the things he's not approved of is, his lying. He lies to Abimelech, he lies to Pharaoh. Those are not approved. Not everything Abraham does is approved of. Only that aspect where he shows faith is approved. Let's drop down finally to Jephthah. Go past Moses here. Okay. And what more shall I say? For the time will fail me if I tell of, and this is verse 32, Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets, who by faith conquered kingdoms, performed acts of righteousness, obtained promises, and shut the mouths of lions. Okay. Now, Samson's a dirtbag. Samson is a pure dirtbag. The only act of faith Samson ever does is his one little act of revenge, where he brings down the temple of Dagon. He's blinded. He's strapped to two pillars in the temple of Dagon, and he pushes the pillars over and brings down the whole house. That's his act of faith. That he puts his faith in God at that point. He's no longer a Nazarite. He's destroyed that vow, every condition of that vow. He's not a Nazarite anymore. His only gain of strength back is because of his faith in God, and God supernaturally empowers him to do it. Okay? Samson's complete life is a shipwreck. He is the paradigmatic fool. He couldn't care less about the things of God. He didn't earn them. They came to him more or less as a result of the Nazarene vow that was imposed upon him. But he couldn't care less. He was a man of his flesh, a man of desire. He was a terrible person. Really, really awful. And the question more is, why does Samson get a mention here? Well, he does one act of faith. One act of faith that brings down the temple on the Philistines. Jephthah's the same way. He puts his faith in God to bring down the sons of Ammon. This is not a blanket thumbs up on everything these guys do. Hardly. They're being mentioned here because they've done one or maybe a couple acts of faith that God used for grand results. And that's what's being shown here. I mean, even take the rest of this. David was a terrible father. He was awful. He was, they call him a man of blood. He was a violent man. So, he had Uriah the Hittite killed. He was a murderer. Not every act in this, they call Hebrews 11 the Hall of Faith. But in some ways oversimplifies it. It more should be called a hall with acts of faith. Because it's not giving a blanket honor to all of these people. Because some of them were dirtbags. Instead, it's basically saying that each of these people performed acts of faith in their life that God used for God's glory. That's the point of Hebrews 11. And that's why Jephthah is mentioned here. Because against insurmountable odds, and frankly, the Israelites in their armed conflict with sons of Ammon were outnumbered. And yet they prevailed because of faith. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. It's a great question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. And I think that's the last super chat. So we're going to take some non-super chats now. And I might actually get out early tonight. Whoa! What a wonderful thing. All right. I'm going to see how far back I can go here. And we're going to start taking some non-super chats. All right. There is one. Bonbon's going to get a wish here. Granted. And take this one here from Bonbon. He wins again. Was there a drop in quality with regards to the golden funerary masks during the transition from the New Kingdom to Intermediate Period 3? When I look at Tutankhamun's mask and Amenemop's, it seems like a quality drop. Yes, there is. And there's a really, really good reason why there's a quality drop. But it's probably not for the reasons you think it is. Okay? In the New Kingdom, they're making funerary masks out of gold. In the Third Intermediate Period, they're making them out of silver. Now, to our modern minds, we're thinking, oh, gold's better than silver. Why didn't they just continue making them out of gold? It's because back in the transition from the New Kingdom to the Third Intermediate Period, silver was still considered to be more valuable than gold. Okay? It's changed now. It's completely reversed. But there, during the New Kingdom, silver was much, much more valuable than gold because it was more scarce. There weren't silver mining operations back then.
You see the camel leopard's $2 one?
Camel leopard's $2 one?
A little bit. And it says,
Oh, no.
Question divided in the world below, and it's part 1,
Okay.
200.
All right, I will take that. I did not see that. But I will take that and just see if I can find that. Okay, found it. All right. All right, just give me a moment. I'll finish this question here and we'll get to it. All right. Was there a drop? So back in the New Kingdom period and before, gold was more common, more available, and thus it was less valuable than silver. Silver was only used for accent pieces, for the most part. So silver was very scarce. Now, during the Third Intermediate period, silver started becoming a lot more available as silver mining operations began. But the perception of the value of silver had not caught up yet. So they're getting a lot of silver in the Third Intermediate period. So the kings of Egypt change. They go from gold to silver. Now, anyone who's worked in the jewelry business for any period of time knows that it is more difficult to work in silver than in gold. It's a less ductile metal. Gold you can just sort of play with. You know, you can just play with, you can beat it, you can mold it, you can stretch it, and it doesn't crack or break. So it's very, very easy to work in gold. It's very ductile, which means you can mold it all over the place. I mean, it's just a wonderful material to work with. I've always enjoyed working with gold more than silver. The Egyptians weren't used to working in silver. At least not on those scales. Those are doing a death mask, doing a entire coffin in silver, very difficult to do. So the Egyptians are having to learn new metalworking techniques to accommodate these new burials of kings. So the quality drop can be, we can owe the quality drop, and it's not a horrible quality drop, as much as it is that it's the techniques, the gold working techniques that the Egyptians had up to the New Kingdom were already 2,000 years old. 2,000 years of gold working. That's a lot of time to perfect your techniques. So by the time you get to the New Kingdom, they're doing fabulous stuff because they have that cultural tradition. By the time you have the Third Intermediate period come around, you have 20 years to learn how to work in silver. You go from nothing to 20 years. That's not very long to pick up new techniques or adapt those techniques. So there is a quality drop because there's a steep learning curve involved, essentially. And it is more difficult to work in silver. So that's why the quality drop. It's not because the craftsmen are less talented. It's not because that the regime was less wealthy. They're still putting everything into those burials. It's just that it takes time to learn those skills, and they're difficult. It's difficult working silver. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for your question. Fascinating question. Great question. All right, let's take that super chat now from the Camelopard for $2. Thank you very much. He says, long question. You'll find it in the world below. Okay. And part 1. Was Israel meant to have a human king in Canaan or have Yahweh as king? If not, why are there guidelines for Israelite kings in the Torah? Okay. Part 2. If they were, why did it take until the time of Samuel, 1 Samuel 8, for them to request one? Why was Samuel against the idea? It seems to have been prophesied in Deuteronomy 17:14, so why wait so long? Okay, great set of questions. Let's take this one bit at a time. Okay. Now, your part 1 of your question. Was Israel meant to have a human king in Canaan or have Yahweh as king? It was meant to have Yahweh as king. Okay. It was meant to be a theocratic kingdom with Yahweh as king. Now, that was the intent. We call that the divine will of God, the perfect will of God. The perfect will of God was for Israel to have Yahweh as king. Your second question. If not, why are there guidelines for Israelite kings in the Torah? All right. For the same reason that there are guidelines on slavery in the Torah. Okay? It's basically along the lines or divorce in the Torah. It's not that God is approving these things, but people are going to do it anyway. So just like you have divorce mentioned in the Torah, God doesn't approve of divorce, but people are going to do it anyway. So if people are going to do it anyway, there's going to be guidelines for how you do it. Likewise, even though God did not intend for Israel to have a king, there are guidelines for it anyway. Such as, he's not to accumulate much gold. When he comes to the throne, he's supposed to create a copy of the law for himself, for him to read every day. He's not to have many wives or many horses. I don't think there's a single one of those the Israelite kings didn't break. But, to your part 2 here. If they were, why did it take until the time of Samuel for them to request one? Essentially, they start off with good judges. The judges were sufficient up until that point. But you ended up with a bad judge. Several bad judges at the end. You started off with good judges, you ended off with bad judges. Drift. This is what's called iniquity or drift. The nation of Israel started off with good judges, good leaders, people who were trying to somewhat adhere, even though most of them were nasty idolaters. You did have some people in Israel, but slowly the nation drifted with bad to worse to horrid judges. Samson being the worst, Jephthah being bad. Bad judges is why they wanted a king. Okay, so that's what prompted, because you're supposed to go right from sort of the book of Judges into 1 Samuel. That's sort of the train of thought here. Is you're ending off in Samuel, the book of Judges, where it says Israel had no king and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And it ended up in that sort of lack of good judges ended up in almost the complete destruction of the tribe of Benjamin. So, Israel was on the course of destroying itself through bad judges, bad leaders, and the general iniquity of the nation. So it took up to that point for the people to say, okay, we've had enough. We want a king. We want a king like other nations. Okay. Now, why was Samuel against the idea? He was against the idea because he wanted his sons to become judges. His sons weren't good. But it also was seen that his sons were bad men. Samuel's sons were not good men. So it would have been more of the same of bad judges. So, and Sam is like every other father, to be honest. Every father wants to see their sons, thrive, prosper. Back then, the way you saw your sons prosper is they take over for you. Samuel was the final judge of Israel, and he was a good judge. But those who had come to replace him, his sons, were not going to be good judges. They were going to be wicked judges. But that doesn't prevent a father wanting their sons to take over. Now, this happened at Fuller Seminary. The guy who founded Fuller Seminary, he was a very, very good man. He was a learned man, an evangelical man. His son went off and got his PhD at basically a liberal seminary, came back a practical atheist, and the whole seminary just sort of spun down the toilet after that. But his father loved his son too much and put him in the presidency after him. Same thing with Samuel. Loved his son so much that he wanted to put him in the judgeship, even though they were not fit for it. Samuel was trying to protect his posterity. In short, that's what he was trying to do. He's trying to protect his posterity. But the time of the judges was over. Okay. God, however, protects Samuel's posterity in other ways by making his posterity temple singers. And you can find more details on that in 1 Chronicles chapter 6, verse 33 to 37. Okay. And your final questions. It seems to have been prophesied in Deuteronomy 17:14, so why wait so long? Okay, again, we have to understand what prophecy is. Now, we're going to just pull that quickly up here just to get reading here. Deuteronomy. (17:4). And if it is told to you, let's see, is this right? 14, sorry. 14. When you enter the land which the Lord your God gives you and you possess to live in, and you say, I will set a king over me like all the nations who are around me, you shall surely set a king over you whom the Lord your God chooses, one from among your countrymen. You shall set as king over yourselves. You may not put a foreigner over yourselves who is not your countryman. Okay. So it's basically not saying you shall do this. It's not prescriptive. It's when you do this. Okay. There's that. There is that sort of, when you enter the land and you say this. There's a condition, set of conditions. Okay. Basically, it's basically the whole, it's not the ideal. It's never the ideal in this case for the Israelites to have put a king over them. But they will, at one point, want to do that like the other nations. So basically, they try to, what seems to have gone on here is that it wasn't that it was prophesied that they needed this, they should have had this, but it was going to happen at some point because of their faithlessness.
More like they're going to.
Yeah, as my producer said, he's got shaking his head going, you're going to do this. At least do it this way. If you're going to do something so stupid, don't do it in a stupid way. Okay? It's more along those lines. Yeah, do the stupidest thing in the smartest manner possible. Okay? And there's many warnings to the Israelites, too, that, once you have a king, bad things are going to happen. There's consequences to having a king. He's going to tax you. He's going to conscript you. For labor, he's going to conscript your kids to go to war. He's going to take your children to be his wives. You're not going to get choice in the matter. So having a king comes with some big negatives. And Israel is warned about this, and they say, oh, we still want a king anyway. Okay. Just do it this way. So that's why it took so long, is because you had to have that sort of, they tried to do it under the judges. God at least tried to get them going in the right direction with the judges, but the iniquity of the nation had its results. So anyway, I hope that answered your question, or at least provided some insight to what's going on in these passages. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay. Our next couple super chats we got one here from BC for $10 Australian. Thank you very much for the super chat. What would you say are some of the best examples of artifacts from other nations that show they considered Israel to be a nation? How early can we more or less prove Israel's nationhood? Okay. The earliest one is probably the Merneptah stela. And that dates to about 1217 BC. And it's about King Merneptah defeating the Libyans. But there's a little poetic section at the end where it talks about one of his campaigns into Canaan. And he basically takes the route up the coastal plain, across the Jezreel Valley, and down into, say, the Shephelah Valley. And his goal is really to conquer Gezer, because they're an upstart kingdom that's doing bad things. But they also encounter tribal groups of Israelites at that time. And that's the first time we find the name Israelite mentioned in any foreign text, period. So that's probably the earliest example that we have of Israel being mentioned. Okay. We do have, the next one is sort of a kind of a leap in time. And it dates to, I believe, about the 9th century, and it's the Moabite stone, where King Mesha, king of Moab, and it's written by him, has to fight both the king of Judah, and he's fighting the kings of Judah, Israel, and Edom. So you do see that in those cases, you see the Jehoram being mentioned here in as coming from the house of Omri. So you do see these various regional players here that we would, take from the biblical text as being national identities. If you've got a king of Israel, you got a kingdom of Israel. If you got a king of Judah, you got a kingdom of Judah. Okay. So again, that dates to somewhere around the 9th century, I believe. So yes, and BC also says, oh, nice. So that's evidence for the split kingdom as well. Yes, it is. Absolutely. Yeah, so it's evidence of both that there was a kingdom and that it was split. And recently, there's even been some work on the Moabite stone that has even shown now that the contested reading of the House of David is also in the text. So we also have now evidence from the Moabite stone alluding to a House of David. So we also have that as well. So you have the two house lines of Israel and Judah as well. You got the Davidic line in Judah, and you've got the Omri line in Israel. So, no, not the House of Kettle, the House of David. House of Kettle Corn. Don't like kettle corn. Only popcorn. So that's actually the next best evidence that we have. And those are the two main ones. I mean, those are the two big archaeological discoveries that show Israel as a nation. The Merneptah victory stela and the Moabite stone. After that, then we also have, say, the Tel Dan stela. that talks about, again, the House of David. So, with that said, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that helped. Very much appreciated. And I do love my popcorn. Another super chat here from BC for $10 Australian. Thank you so much for the super chat. Where can we find the most reliable Bible maps? Are some sources just superior, or is it a case of accuracy varying map to map, place by place? Oh, I generally refer people to two sources when it comes to Bible maps. Now, I think you've got atlases, and then you've got, say, large classroom maps. Okay. Now, the large classroom maps, getting a good large classroom map is very hard to do. And I am going to give you the most unlikely source that I would ever recommend for any resource for a classroom map. If you want a fantastic classroom map, I mean a big poster-sized classroom map, the best one I've actually seen is published by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They make a tremendous classroom map. Beautiful. Beautiful. It's got great color, good topography. It's just a beautiful, stunning map. I don't recommend anything else they do. You actually have to mail into the publications division at Salt Lake City. I think it costs, it's like not even all that expensive, it's like $40. Tremendous map. Tremendously good map. It's absolutely perfect for a classroom, because you can see that thing all the way to the back of the class. I mean, it's like on an A0 sheet. Big. And it's printed on, as I best recall, it's printed on cloth. So it's durable too. That's one of the things that makes it so good as a classroom map. It's just a cloth map. So, excellent, excellent map. Would recommend it for classroom settings. Now, it doesn't have all the cities. It's not a fully fleshed out map with all the cities, but it's got the topography right.
So they buy one.
Now, for atlases. Atlases are a different story. I recommend 2 atlases for personal use. The Moody Bible Atlas by Alan Millard and Paul Lawrence is very good, very accurate. Not always the most useful maps, but it's a good atlas. It's a good atlas. The other one, Lawrence. The other one I would recommend is the atlas that was done by Barry Beitzel. Maybe it was Beitzel that... Sorry, I may have got that the other way around. The Moody one, I think, is Beitzel's. But Barry Beitzel did an atlas as well. That is excellent. So Barry Beitzel's atlas is phenomenally good. I like it. Some of the places I don't agree with him as far as where he charts them. But his atlases have great topography. They've got great topography. You can see what's going on in the particular routes. He's got road maps on the atlas. It's a very good atlas, and I think it's up to its 3rd edition now. I had the 2nd edition, and that was excellent. So they're both very, very good atlases. So those were the ones I would recommend. The one by Millard and Lawrence, and the other one by Barry Beitzel. So, anyway, those are the 2 atlases I recommend. They are the best available in the moment. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Other maps, some are good, some are bad. They vary in mileage. But those are the best. Those are the best that I would recommend. So, thank you much, Super Chat. Very, very much appreciated. And that, I think, is the last Super Chat, so we're back to the non-Super Chats.
There's a non-super.
Okay, where?
Underneath leopards and a mixed by video.
Okay.
I delete this.
Oh, brother.
So if you haven't seen, because you haven't seen it,
No, I haven't seen it. All right, where is it?
I'm a leopard. Colors was
What's the timestamp on it? Give me a timestamp.
I don't
There should be a time right beside it. You don't have timestamps. That's going to be very hard for me to find, hon.
here's the time. Super chat.
Okay, then give me the closest super chat by... Tell me what the super chat says. There's a lot of $5 super chats in here.
Yes. Super chat is a leopard. What's the mix?
Okay. Find that super chat.
Then it's 1, 2, 7 down. After clever point.
Okay. Have you seen Atheological's new response video to UNIP? All right. Have I seen Atheological's new response video to UNIP? No, I have not. I have not watched it. He's got like 6 or 7 responses now. He's obsessed. He's been just putting them out like every couple days. I've got stuff to do. I don't pay any attention at all to Atheologica. You know, once I did that one response video to his,
That's all the interaction, right?
that's it. That's all I've ever interacted with him. I've just ignored him.
So if it's not on that one popcorn video, you haven't said
No,
anything that's being attributed to
no,
him
I've said
doing really foul stuff.
no. I've said nothing about him. I don't even care about him.
Say that, but
I mean, it's nothing to me. It's just more or less, you know, hey, okay, you said some wrong stuff about Osiris. That's it. That's all I've said about him. I have,
that's all you generally say about anyone is
yeah.
you discuss their scholarship.
I discussed his views. That's what I discussed. Nothing more. I have nothing personal against the guy. His views, I think, are wrong. I think he tears the scholarship out of context. That's all I've said about the guy. I don't know where he got anything else from that he may have inferred or implied. That's it. And I have not seen his videos. Good.
I do not recommend other people.
And I don't recommend other people seeing his videos either. You know, the less attention the guy gets, the better. Okay? So. Okay.
Now, what do you think of the idea? They want you to start playing Egyptian-based video games, and they will watch you.
Playing Egyptian-based video games. Oh. Oh, man. Ah. Well, I'm not going to start playing Egyptian-based video games because, frankly, some of that stuff is copyrighted. So a lot of it would.
Now you play it, right?
Oh yeah, people do, but people can get taken down too. Yeah, so it only depends on which video games are allowed. And for some reason I seem to recall that Assassin's Creed is not one of them. Is a intellectual property that's very closely guarded. So yeah,
They would love to watch you see the
Dr. Fault Twitch stream. You wish. You wish.
They do. They seriously do.
All right, I'm going to take this non-super chat here from Addison Weir. How does one demonstrate literary dependence or intertextuality, especially in light of certain counterexamples? For example, the Titanic versus the wreck of the Titan. Ooh, that's difficult. Okay, that's going to be really difficult. Now, for those who don't know the difference between the Titanic and the wreck of the Titan. The Titanic is, that, of course, that big ocean liner that hit the iceberg, went down, and a lot of people died because there weren't enough lifeboats. The wreck of the Titan is a fictional account. It's a work of fiction that talks about this ocean liner called the Titan that hits an iceberg, sinks, and a lot of people drown because of a lack of lifeboats. A lot of similarities between the Titanic and the fictional work The Wreck of the Titan. The problem is The Wreck of the Titan was written 15 years before the Titanic sunk. Okay? People tend to see patterns. Okay? People also can infer what could happen under certain circumstances based on those patterns. This can make it very difficult to basically differentiate what is a pattern versus what is a intertextuality. And intertextuality is a text reacting to a previously written text. Okay? Yeah, it's a very strange coincidence between the Titanic and the wreck of the Titan. Very strange coincidence. But these coincidences happen. They do happen. So we just, as a matter of course, presume intertextuality instead of, say, pattern recognition. Because pattern recognition is even harder to prove than to presume intertextuality. So in a sense, what we're doing is assuming. We're assuming it is intertextuality, not pattern recognition. Just because of, again, it's really, really hard to get in the head of the writer to say, oh, this is pattern recognition. Because if you also say this is pattern recognition, you're also going to have to look at, say, the cultural context and say, okay, these are things that are in the culture that would presume these things, whereas, say, in intertextuality, outside texts are coming into the culture, and the writer is then interacting with those texts. So normally, the reasonable course in this is to presume intertextuality. That's what's usually the better guess. But at some point, it is going to come down to, in many respects, what is guesswork. And I think that's oftentimes the safest, most discerning course of action here, unless we learn otherwise. And sometimes we do learn otherwise. Like, for example, in the case of, say, the plagues of the Exodus, there are people out there who say that the prophecy of Ippaware is predicting or was written at the time of the Exodus because of the plagues that we find in the papyrus of Ippaware. But we also know, too, that you can't date the papyrus of Ippaware to the New Kingdom. It only dates to late Dynasty 12. So you do have to then go back and say, all right, maybe that's not the first time those kind of plagues have happened. So, people did, when they first discovered Ippaware, they basically said, oh, this must refer to the Exodus. And that's a very old view. But, the more we learn, we go, oh, no, it's not that Ippaware had intertextuality with the Exodus. It's that Ippaware is way previous as recounting similar events that happen in the history of Egypt. So there are times when you do get these surprises thrown at you. Okay? That does happen. But it doesn't happen, given a lack of evidence here, we sort of have to presume intertextuality until proven otherwise. So, thank you very much for the question. I hope that answered it, and I hope that helped. Okay.
Wait, you mean record the Titan is a good timetable? Archaeological evidence.
Addison Weir again. I take another question from his. What's your favorite book by Michael Heiser? Unseen World. I think that's probably his best book. He did do one on demons too, but it was really a sort of a abridged version of Unseen Realm, just more or less tailored to demons. But really, if you've read Unseen World, you've probably read Michael Heiser's best work right there.
Tailored to demons? Are you saying
No, that's not what I meant. I did not mean it was tailored to demon readers. No. No, he tailed the Unseen Realm to basically sell more books with his book on demons. So he used to recommend his book on demons to, say, more lay audiences, and his Unseen Realm to more higher readers. But my favorite is Unseen Realm. Okay. I have not read his what's it called now? Reversing Hermon. I have not read that one. So I can't say I have not. As I said, I know that's the other book that he says it's really important, but I have not read Reversing Hermon. So anyway, thank you for the question. That's sort of where that's my favorite book of his, Unseen Realm. Okay. Okay. St. Ronan said, I've been reading St. Irenaeus' work on heresies concerning the Valentinians. Hippolytus is on it too, and I'm having trouble understanding his work. What is the nature of his writing? Okay. They are writing in accordance with the style that people wrote in the late 2nd, early 3rd century. Okay? Or early 2nd, I guess, early 2nd to the 3rd century. And the style of writing for the Church Fathers is very verbose. It's very verbose. It's prolix. And that's a great way to say it. It's prolix. It's long. It's complicated. It's meant to be long. And you're supposed to retain a lot of it in your head. So you're supposed to follow along for 50 pages and then they get to an argument. There's a lot of setup. Most of what Irenaeus does, and even Hippolytus writes, is setup for an argument. If we were to write something like Irenaeus' work on heresies today, no publisher would accept it. Way too long, way too complicated. You'll lose your reader too quickly. That sort of writing doesn't fly anymore. At least not in a Twitter world of 188 character attention span. Okay? So today's readers are of a very short attention span. And most publishers do not want you to write a book that's longer than 200 pages. If you write under 250 pages, your publisher's going, "Oh yeah, that's in our sweet spot. We can market this." Just because people's attention spans today are so short. But people's attention spans in the 2nd and 3rd centuries weren't short. They were very, very long. And people could easily read 50 pages and keep track of the argument. Keep track of all the buildup for when they did do that final, we're going to read it this way. This is the argument based on all that preceding material. So they did this often because of, you might have a papyrus with Irenaeus, but you might not have all the source material he's referring to. So he's going to give you as much detail as possible so you don't have to go back to the source material. So back then you wouldn't cite your sources. But what you would do is you would give voluminous examples from those sources. So they didn't have a citation style. You won't find Turabian back in the 1st century.
They were barbarians.
But what they are going to do is they are going to give you so much information and expect you to retain that information as they go 50, 80 pages in. And then they're going to give you the argument in a rather short burst. So that's typically how they wrote. So you're going to slog through 50, 80 pages every time. You're just going to do it. And then you're going to get to an argument. And that argument's going to make it all worth it. Okay? So it's a style of writing called polemics. Okay? It's not really an apologetic writing. It's more of a polemical writing. So that more describes the nature of the writing, where they're taking the initiative to engage their arguments before anyone really asks. So they're doing sort of preemptive apologetics, and that's what we mean by polemics. Preemptive apologetics, where they're going to take possible objections, raise them themselves, and then answer those objections. And because they're doing it preemptively, we call this polemics. So that's the nature of their arguments. That's what they're trying to do. And that's why they have structured their writing the way they did. Huge amount of preamble and build up with a very, very short argument at the end. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the question. Jaden Robert, did you tell a theological to hang himself? No, I didn't. Next. Oh. Yeah. Just the claims of this thing are getting just more preposterous by the day. Martial apologist. He asks, how very dishonest is the latest attack on you claiming you told someone to hang themselves? Scale of 1 to, quote, I did not have an affair with that woman, Monica Lewinsky, end quote. Yeah. Their claims have fallen through, essentially. It's now been thoroughly proven that my statements were not misogynistic, as much as they've... And it's thoroughly been proven that they agree with my statements. Yeah, the statements that were actually said when put in their proper context. They agree with them. They agree with those statements that everyone should be judged on the merit of their scholarship, not on how they look. Everyone agrees with this. At least they should.
To amplify what that Jonah merits not on their looks. Whether if they're good looking, you don't assume they're stupid.
Yeah.
But you also don't assume they're better.
I mean, we should be blind to looks here when it comes to evaluating a person's scholarship. If they're good looking, those good looks should not count in their favor in evaluating the scholarship. Likewise, if they're less good looking, that should not count against them in evaluating their scholarship.
And vice versa. If they're good looking, you don't assume they're stupid.
Yeah.
You go to the scholarship.
Yeah, you go to the scholarship is the point. That's the point, is you go to the scholarship. Now that they don't have that, now that they have none of that, none of those accusations have panned out, now they're making stuff up.
McClellan has stated publicly that the U refers to the BBC.
Yeah. I mean, McClellan has basically admitted in writing that the U I stated is basically referring to the BBC, not to the scholar originally intended. They've also admitted, too, that they agree that one should not do theology by looks. They both, even Kip admits that that's true. So they've got nothing left. So they are thrashing wildly.
And we are letting them thrash.
And, I don't know where a theologian got that claim from. No idea. I didn't say it. I don't know who said it. It wasn't me. So I haven't watched his videos I haven't watched a single one of his videos since I critiqued his first one. I haven't watched a single one. Don't care. It's a distraction to the work I want to do, which is teaching. And I want to focus on teaching. So, they're going to continue being dishonest. They start off being dishonest. They're just going to continue being dishonest. Well. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. Okay, let's see what else I've got here. Yeah, I think we'll probably find a couple more good ones and then call it a night. We're not gonna go to midnight tonight because there's just.
Addison is still on. He usually is our last call. We will take a non-superchat from Addison. We can write a new one.
Yeah, we're just did not get the turnout tonight though that we normally do, so we'll probably not go on too much too late. But who knows? As soon as I say that. All right, I'll take this one here. This is a Warrior of the Most High. Why did the Greeks transliterate the Egyptian ch with a theta? Okay, and that's because they don't have that phoneme. That's essentially what it is. So that ch sound, they don't have it in Greek. In fact, when the Greek alphabet is adapted for Coptic, they have to add 6 additional characters to account for Egyptian phonemes. So among those is the ch sound. So that's why they in standard Greek, standard Koine Greek, they have to replace the Egyptian ch with a theta. But it's not the same phoneme, not even close. Okay, so I hope that answers the question. Okay, I'm getting close to the end here. So when I hit the end here and I don't find any more questions, we'll call it a night.
What's a favorite?
Well, has not showed up yet, so still gotta go here. All right, it just showed up. Super chat from John Fayback for 19.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. I can't think of anything tonight, but wanted to send you some support. Will, thank you very much. The support of our super chatters does keep food on our table and does keep this channel going. It is basically our largest source of income. So we very, very much appreciate it. We want to thank you very much. It does help. It really helps. Without it, we just can't keep going. So we do appreciate it, and yeah, it means a lot to us. So thank you very much. I'm gonna hit back. I saw some questions back there, I think. Okay, we are. Dafa Rafiala, you've asked the same question a number of times here. We don't take questions that have been repeated just because it throws me off. So if you repeat the same question more than once, we don't take it. Okay? So just keep that in mind for the future. Okay. Oh, Warrior the Most High. If you get a chance, will you do a video game competition with the other Paul? It could be any game. Oh, no. No, 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 no.
That seems like fun.
It does, but I'd probably get my clock cleaned.
You let me win.
Yeah, I let you win, but that's.
Well, you don't let me win.
I don't let you win, but
I do win.
You do
You're
win.
Okay with it.
yeah, I'm okay with losing. It's just I don't think it'd be much of a show. I think
Oh,
I mean, when I do these games, you have to understand. I play the sniper. I mean, that's what I play. So it's just like
don't tell them that until. Don't reveal that until you're.
I'm sure he'd love that. I'm sure he'd love that. I'm not really set up here though for online gaming, so I'm not sure if that would even be how that would even work. I mean, I don't even play online games. Most of my games are on the PC, so I'm not even sure how we would even get that to work. So,
Minari asked it. Now there's a multiplayer Skyrim.
I did not know there was a multiplayer Skyrim mod. That would be cool though. Maybe you and I could play. That would be really cool. No, I did not know there was a multiplayer Skyrim mod. That would be excellent. Interesting. Learned something new. Okay. Is there archaeological evidence for Solomon and his kingdom? I've had atheists claim that there's no proof of him or his reign. Ooh. We have proof of David. We have proof, or at least good evidence, for Jeroboam and Rehoboam. It would be very, very odd to have nobody reigning between them. So that would be very strange very, very strange. Now, we do, I believe we have some seals from some of his administrators. So, the direct evidence of Solomon has been lacking. At least I do not think we do. There is something that sort of springs into mind, though, and let me take a quick check here. Because there was something, let me see if there was a seal. No. Yeah, I don't think we have anything. We don't have anything direct from Solomon's reign. But so that's the one thing we sort of lack here is a direct link. But as I said, we have evidence for David. We have evidence for Solomon's successors. So as I said, it would be very, very difficult to not have at least some king in between. This is why, even though we don't have direct evidence, we have strong enough evidence of, say, the predecessor and the successors that most historians do think Solomon is historical. So, there's no direct evidence, but the indirect evidence here is strong. So I would say that almost nobody, no responsible historian today would say that there was no Solomon. Now, the extent of his kingdom is debated. We don't know exactly the size and the extent of Solomon's kingdom, although it had to have been at least covering the trade routes across North Canaan. Because it's those choke points that determine his wealth. And frankly, establish the wealth of, say, the northern kingdom of Israel when it does break off. So again, there's no direct evidence of Solomon, but there's enough indirect evidence that it as I said, any serious historian, I mean, if you count the Bible as direct evidence, then yes, we've got evidence. Okay. That would be the closest thing we have to direct evidence. Again, would that convince an atheist? Probably not. Because any atheist is going to be skeptical of the Bible. Now, interestingly enough, if we were talking about, say, the individual scrolls of the Bible, we would have lots of evidence. Because the Bible as we have it today is collected from various texts. You know, we have to remember the Bible here is an anthology. It's an anthology. It contains books, the books of Kings. Really, one book written as two parts, but in two scrolls. But the Book of Kings is a separate source from, say, the Book of Chronicles, which is also a separate source. So, going on to that, you have Psalms which are separate works again, attributed to Solomon. We have the book of, say, the Song of Solomon itself, another source. So we have a lot of these different sources if we take the Bible not as, say, a unified book that comes out of, say, canonization in the first few centuries to basically appealing to the book on the basis of its individual sources. we would basically then have to say that, yeah, Book of Kings affirms Chronicles, Chronicles affirms Book of Kings, etc., etc. So, there's proof. There's evidence. Will that satisfy an atheist? Probably not. But that's just the way it goes, too. So anyway, I hope that helps, at least bring some perspective to it. Let me just take a look here. Okay. Let's see here. We're getting close to the end here, so a couple more, and we'll call it. Danny DeMont, what is your favorite wacky theory on the real origin purpose of the pyramids? Oh boy. Well, so many wacky theories about the origin of the theory of the pyramids. I mean, you got the grain silo theory of Ron Wyatt. I mean, that's always wacky. You've got...
that would be a lot of grain.
That's a lot of grain, but they weren't hollow either. So there's not that much grain. You can't stuff much grain in a pyramid. They're not hollow. They're full of narrow passages.
But he didn't know that.
Of course he didn't know that.
He thought it was like big grains.
It's not a grain silo. Not at all. The energy generator, the electricity generator theory is also pretty wacky, too. And you do get the Stargate theory as well, that they were alien landing pads. I mean, people do say that. That's pretty wacky as well. Or that they're used to communicate with aliens. You know, they're radios to the stars.
It's for great movies.
Oh, it does make for great movies. Yeah, I mean, they're all crazy. I mean, these views are just nuts. Okay? But people do believe them. People do believe them. I don't know. The grain theory is pretty funny. I have to admit, that one's pretty funny. I lean towards the grain one being the one I find most hysterical because it's the least practical of the lot.
It's a lot of work for grain too. When you can just like build a box or
Yeah, exactly. It's just so impractical for a grain silo. It's just not even funny. So funny. It's just yeah, no way. So So that's probably my favorite wacky theory on the real purpose of the pyramids. Okay. But just to make no mistake about it, they were not grain silos, electricity generators, alien landing pads, or alien radio to the stars. So just want to make that clear. Okay, we've had Mouthwash appear, come on to the scene tonight. Just in the nick of time. Wow. Mouthwash for $2. Thank you much for the super chat. Could we build the same pyramids today or larger? Ooh. Well, workers' comp would never be the same again, I'll tell you that. Could we build it? Yes. It would bankrupt a country. Okay? It would definitely bankrupt a country, but we could do it again. But you couldn't do it today with today's building codes, with today's worker safety standards. You couldn't do it with at least any OSHA violations all over the place. We could do it. We have the tools. We have the technology. It could be done. But
we can do it with Legos.
We can do it with Legos. Yes, we probably could do it with Legos.
Stop.
Well, the fact is, these pyramids nearly bankrupted Egyptian society back when inflation was small. I mean, the Great Pyramid of Khufu at Giza nearly destroyed the economy of Egypt. You know, it's just, these were expensive projects in their day. Today, they're even more expensive because of labor costs, because of material costs, all of that. The only thing that would really prevent us from doing it again, building these things again, is the cost. That's really what would prevent us.
Maybe Musk.
Pyramids on Mars, built by Elon Musk. Well, that would explain a lot. Yeah, when you figure in all the safety and standards that's happened since, there were a lot of fatalities in building pyramids. Make no mistake about that. People died all the time making those things. So yeah, once you include all the safety standards and all that, yeah, it'd be prohibitively expensive. Essentially prohibitively expensive. So it's not that we lack the technology, but still we lack the wealth. So anyway, thank you very much for that question. That's a great question. Practically, it can be done. Or I should say, in theory, it could be done again. Technologically, we'd have no problem rebuilding them. But paying the bills, that would be the issue. Totally would be the issue. So thank you very much for that super chat. Really appreciate it. Okay. All right, take this last one from Bonbon here. This will be his last question of the night. What is the typical educational training regimen that a young prince would undergo before they inherited the throne and became a pharaoh? What were they expected to know? Well, they were expected to be able to read and write. So they were often sent to a little institution called the Royal Coff. The Coff was this school that scribes went to. Okay, at scribal school, they would learn how to read Egyptian, write Egyptian, both hieroglyphic, hieratic, and demotic. If they went through advanced scribal training, they would also learn Akkadian. and maybe another language like Hittite. Okay? So they were expected to be able to read and write multiple scripts, multiple languages. It also included things such as accounting practices and basic penmanship, what court documents were supposed to look like. So they would basically make copies of existing court documents so that they understood the forms and the function of court documents. So it was basically how to administer a kingdom. And kings had writing equipment. The kings in Egypt were literate. They were literate. They could read and write. They had personal writing equipment. They had chests with scrolls in it that they wrote themselves. So that was what they were expected when they came to the throne, is that they would be literate enough to run a bureaucratic kingdom. This is actually not true of a lot of kings of the ancient Near East. A lot of kings in the ancient Near East never learned to read or write. But other people would write for them. So they would dictate and other people would write. If it was important enough, a king was expected to write on his own. So it's a very, very different way, and a lot of this comes out of the fact that Egypt was a bureaucracy. A very, very large bureaucracy. It took a lot of people to run the bureaucracy of Egypt. A lot of accounting was done. Proportioning of land every year because of the flooding had to be done by scribes. There were ancestral claims that had to be litigated, and sometimes those claims went right up to the king himself if they were an important enough person. So they had to know how to adjudicate legal matters. They had to know how to read documents. They had to know, basically, how to run a kingdom. Not every king had all that, but that was the ideal, which is why young princes were sent off to the Koth to learn how to do the same job that a scribe would do. So anyway, I hope that answers the question. Thank you very much for the question.
Super chat, but nobody sees
it might not have gone through. This credit card might not have cleared. That happens a lot.
it. Says I own the item.
I have no idea. That sounds like a error code. That sounds like an error code. Yeah. I think Cleverboy's probably right. That credit card company doesn't think you'd be doing that type of transition and froze it. But no, I'm not seeing any super chat from him. Have him just ask his question. Dean, just ask your question. We'll take it. Then go fix matters with your bank, because you don't want to have that happen again. Credit card version of 403.
The Nimrod. That was complicated.
Oh, the Nimrod one. Okay. I'm probably going to have to give you an unsatisfactory answer to that anyway.
You give him $20, Dan.
All right, it'll just take a moment for this to appear.
Ah, Bon retyped it. Could Nimrod have been a translator?
Okay.
For example, and he gives the American.
I just have to wait for a moment for it to show up on my screen here, and then we can take it.
Ian said that's the one.
Yeah, got it. Okay. I want to thank Jack Ray for sponsoring another question. Thank you very much for the super chat. We really, really appreciate the support, and we appreciate you funding other people's questions. So very much appreciate it. And we also want to thank Bon for retyping the question. And the question... And now Dean Salazar's question, okay? Which is, could Bon transliteration or title? Probably is. Could Nimrod have been a transliteration or title? For example, would Enma-Baragessi, the Sumerian throne name, translate to Nimrod in any way? Cushite, conqueror, Nippur as Babylon, etc. Oh, Kishite. Conqueror, Nippur as Babylon, etc. Similars. I have not looked into the whole Nimrod thing close enough to really sort of determine one way or the other. There's a lot of vagueness with those texts that makes it very, very difficult to nail it down. Could it have been a transliteration or a title? Yeah, maybe. We don't know exactly what it is. So, I don't know if Enma-Baragessi could have really been that title for Nimrod. I don't, off the top of my head, understanding that what I have in front of me here is a English transliteration. I'd have to go back to the Sumerian to really sort of piece that out. And frankly, I don't know Sumerian. Okay. In fact, I'd probably end up having to go to the Akkadian because I actually know Akkadian a lot better than I don't know Sumerian at all. So that would be an impossible question for me to answer given the scope of my knowledge. So it's going to drive Dane mad. But again, I don't know Sumerian. So for me, to answer that question would be very, very difficult to do. So I'm going to have to defer that. Is it possible? Maybe.
He's trying to rule it out.
He's trying to... Well, from what I can just see, that Enma-Baragessi does not look like, at least prima facie, that it would transliterate to Nimrod. But then that begs the question of where does Nimrod originate from? And that's what we're not clear on. So, and that's going to be a really, really impossible thing to answer, honestly.
Dean said, Genesis will make me lose my mind.
Quite possibly, yes.
You should read that.
Genesis, he says, Genesis will make me lose my mind, laugh out loud. Yeah, well, a lot of people have struggled with the whole identity of Nimrod. You know, you're not the first one. You know, Sayce did in the 19th century, and he was a very brilliant scholar. So, you know, you're not going to be alone here in trying to tackle this one. Many people have tried. The attempts have been not always all that successful. So, Sayce, he was a Assyriologist. He was an Assyriologist in the 19th century. A very well-known one. Very well-known Assyriologist. So, yeah. Could it be related to the Ninurta somehow? Um, doubt it. Doubt it. The consonants on that are not right. But Sace, as in, I'll type out the name here. There, Sace. It's you. So anyway, I think that is going to be the final question of the night. We are at the end of the questions. We've gone through all the questions tonight that I want to take, and we've done all the super chat. So we're actually coming out with a 3-hour show, which is actually, very short for us. It's like the short. But as promised,
this is the target. We're finally hitting our target.
We're finally hitting our target. We're not going 4 or 5 hours this time. We're doing a 3-hour show. I can live with this. Okay. So anyway, we're going to call it a night, I guess, at this point, because I've got no more questions and no more super chats, so we're done. So anyway, I want to thank everyone who joined us tonight and who donated a super chat. Very, very much appreciate your support of our channel. I also want to thank all those people who, asked the questions, even the non-super chatters, because we had some interesting questions tonight. Really, really interesting questions. Amazing selection of questions tonight. I also want to thank our Patreon supporters who help us to keep the lights on as far as the equipment goes, keep our equipment upgraded. And we can't do it without our Patreon supporters' help. And if you feel like supporting us through Patreon, please do so. We got links for all our support packages in the description. Whether it's Patreon, our cryptocurrency accounts, or even our merch store, which we do very much love our merch. So, oops, there's our merch. So those are other ways you can support us as well. We also want to thank our regular subscribers, those who come onto the channel, who talk about or who leave comments, likes, dislikes. The algorithm likes them all. So we can't do this without people watching our videos. So with that said, I want to wish you all a great, great night. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next week on Ancient Egypt and the Bible. Good night, everyone.